They say history is written by the victors, but sometimes it's rewritten by screenwriters, and then the sultanas of the 16th century, whose decisions shifted the borders of empires, are transformed into characters of soap operas, with perpetual intrigues, poison in coffee cups, and dialogues by the fountain. We are frozen between two mirrors. In one, the glittering yet reality-distant world of the series. In the other, the dry lines of Ottoman chronicles and the dispatches of Venetian ambassadors. Where's the truth? Today, we will try to unearth it. Our arena is not a soundstage with a film crew, but the pinnacle of the world in the first half of the 16th century. The Ottoman Empire under Suleiman the Lawgiver, Kanuni, is a superpower, breathing down Europe's neck, controlling trade routes from Asia and holding the Mediterranean in fear. In Istanbul, the fate of kingdoms is decided. And within the heart of this titanic state beats its own universe, hidden from prying eyes, the imperial harem. This is not merely the women's quarters. This is a parallel court, a center of informal power, a nexus of political connections and dynastic calculations. And at the center of this nexus are two figures whose shadows in popular culture are longer than their actual biographies. Hafsa Sultana, not just a mother, but the valide, the first title of the empire after the sultan. Wife of Selim the Grim, mother of Suleiman, the true patron of an entire era. She survived her husband's rise, the deaths of her Shehzade sons in the struggle for the throne, and lived to see the crown placed upon her Suleiman. Her authority is not a matter of love, but a matter of political tradition. She is the matriarch, the institution, the pillar.
Hürrem Sultan, not just a concubine, but the Haseki, a captive from Galicia who made an unprecedented leap from harem's slave to the pinnacle. She became not merely a favorite, but the legal wife of the commander of the faithful, a case unheard of for centuries. Mother to 5 of his children, including the heir, Selim. Her name appears in diplomatic correspondence. Her letters to the King of Poland are preserved in archives. Her charitable complexes still stand today. She is an anomaly, a system hacker, a living challenge to a centuries-old order. And here arises the central question upon which dozens of episodes and thousands of online posts are built. Who were they to each other? The series paints an epic feud, an old lioness, guardian of the dynasty's laws, versus a young predator trampling those very laws. Secret schemes, attempts to eliminate one another, a struggle for influence over Suleiman. It's superb drama. But history is a bad screenwriter. It loves ambiguity. What if their relationship was more complex than a black-and-white enmity? What if between the institutional power of the valide and the personal power of the Haseki existed not only conflict, but also a temporary alliance of mutual benefit? What if Hafsa, the wise ruler of the harem, initially saw in Hurrem not a threat, but an instrument, and Hurrem saw in Hafsa not an enemy, but a necessary patron and teacher in the rules of the lethally dangerous game at the throne? We are embarking on an investigation. We will set aside the gaudy fabrics and dramatic pauses. Instead, we will take in hand the letters, diplomatic dispatches, and chroniclers' records. We will decipher how the kitchen of power truly functioned within the harem, what levers of influence Hafsa Sultan possessed, and what formidable qualities Hurrem managed to employ. We will witness how personal affinities drowned in the cold waters of dynastic politics, where the main question was not about a family dinner, but about who would become the next sultan.
Are you ready? For a time, forget about the TV series. Before us is a 16th century detective story where the stakes are the greatest empire in the world and the clues are scattered across the archives of 3 continents. Let's start from the very beginning, from that day when a red-haired slave named Anastasia first appeared at the feet of Hafsa Sultan. Our journey through palace intrigues is just beginning, and so you don't miss other stories like this one, click that magical subscribe button and the bell next to it. This helps the channel grow and allows us to find the most fascinating stories for you and create higher quality videos. Hurrem's story does not begin in the harem, but in smoke. In the smoke of burning houses on the outskirts of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, somewhere near Rewritten. That very Slavic beauty with golden hair is not a romantic image, but a distinguishing feature. On the slave markets of Kaffa, fair skin and light eyes were valued highly, like rare porcelain. She was probably named Anastasia, and her patronymic was Gashkovna, if we believe the Polish chronicles, the daughter of an Orthodox priest, not of royal blood, but not a simple peasant girl either. This nuance is critical. From childhood, she saw how power was structured at the parish level, knew the value of words and the strength of ritual. She was not a wild girl from the fields. This was a young woman from a class that read, wrote, and kept chronicles. She was captured by the Crimean Tartars, an instrument of the Ottoman Empire, for whom the slave trade was the foundation of the budget. The chain, raid, a transit point in Crimea, a ship to Istanbul. A standard scheme, a conveyor belt. On this conveyor, many were broken, but not her. In the harem of Topkapi, she was named Hurrem, the laughing one, the joyful. This was not about her character, it was a reputation, the exact opposite of the established image of a melancholic, submissive concubine. She did not cry at night for her lost homeland, at least not in front of others. She laughed, and that laugh, sharp, ironic, perhaps with a slight hoarseness from the horrors she had endured, became her first and main weapon. It cut through the silence of the musty corridors of the old palace. It attracted the attention of Suleiman. But before he noticed her, there was school, a cruel, quiet, deadly school of the harem, where every smile was a calculation, every sigh a message, and every friend a potential executioner. Hürrem entered the retinue of Mahidevran Sultan, mother of the heir apparent Mustafa, essentially into the camp of her main rival, even before she became a rival. She had to learn everything, and immediately. Language, poetry, etiquette, calligraphy, the art of conversation, poisons, intrigue, the psychology of power. She devoured knowledge like a starving beast. European diplomats recorded the flashpoint. By 1520-21, as soon as Suleiman became sultan, Hürrem was no longer just a concubine. She was a fact. They described her, not tall, slender, with copper hair and piercing eyes. But the main thing was not beauty. There were hundreds of beautiful women. The main thing was her aura, charisma, the ability to be the only one in a room full of people. Her first triumph was the birth of her son, Shehzadeh Mehmed, in 1521. This was her ticket to the grand game. A child was not merely an heir, it was an asset, a currency, a chess piece on the empire's board. Then came a daughter, Mirima, more sons. She gave birth with a regularity that was a silent rebuke to Mahidevran, whose era was ending. Each child strengthened her position, transforming her from a favorite into the mother of a dynasty.
By the late 1520s, she was no longer a captive. She was a strategist. Her laughter grew quieter, her gaze deeper. The joyful concubine was becoming Hürrem Sultan. The girl from Rewritten had burned in the flames of that very raid. From the ashes, a figure was born who was destined to rewrite the rules of the game for the entire empire. But to play for high stakes, she needed a patron, and she found one not in Suleiman, him she had conquered, but in his mother. This was not a union of hearts, it was a union of minds and ambitions. Hafsa Sultan, the Valide. This was not simply the Sultan's mother, it was a position, arguably the second most significant in the empire, after the Padishah himself. But if the Sultan was the face, the symbol, and the sword, then the Valide was the brain, the heart, and the nerve center of the giant organism, and Hafsa was perhaps its most brilliant operator. Her power was not a gift, it was an influence apparatus built from the ground up, brick by brick, from three key elements: blood, money, and information. According to some sources, she was not a slave sold at a market, she was a princess. Aisha Hafsa, the daughter of the Crimean Khan Menli I Giray, arrived in the Ottoman realm as a living diplomatic treaty. Her marriage to Shehzadeh Selim was not romance, but pure geopolitics, an alliance with the Crimean Khanate, the sword and shield of the Ottomans in the north. Hafsa's financial power was colossal and entirely legitimate. She managed her own waqif, a religious and charitable endowment whose scale was staggering. Revenues flowed into her treasury, destined to be transformed into stone and alms.
Take Manisa, not just a province, but the former headquarters of Shahzadeh Suleiman. Here in 1522-23, Hafsa launched a monumental project. She didn't just build, she created an autonomous microcosm, a city within a city. A complex with a mosque, a madrasa, a school, a public kitchen for the poor, and a dervish lodge. Architecturally, a paragon of Ottoman style. Socially, a revolution. Her superintendent, Timurtaşoğlu Ali Bey, acted not as a contractor, but as an urbanist. He built 20 houses west of the mosque, and he struck an unprecedented deal with the residents: pay any tax except the land tax. In effect, he created the first free economic zone in the Ottoman Empire. These houses became a magnet. A new district emerged, which began to dictate the vector of growth for the entire city. This was not charity. This was master-class urban planning policy. However, Hafsa was interested not only in the architecture, but also in the living, pulsating infrastructure. Let's look into the Waqf registers. The numbers there speak louder than any historian. The Imaret, a public soup kitchen, staff, 20 people, annual expenditure, 16.5 tons of meat and 91.5 tons of wheat. Convert that into daily portions, and it amounts to full meals for hundreds of people every single day. This was not a one-time charity event. This was systemic warfare against hunger. The madrasa, up to 10 teachers with fixed salaries. The dervish lodge, 9 permanent residents. The mosque, 2 imams, a preacher, 4 muezzins. By 1531, the total staff of the complex was 117 people. She didn't just create a charitable foundation, she created the region's largest employer, complete with a social benefits package and opportunities for career advancement.
Her endowments in Bursa, Menteşe, Trabzon, and that very caravanserai on the road to Edirne, around which an entire town grew, these were all nodes of a single network, a network that fed, healed, educated, and spiritually sustained the empire on a micro level. This was soft power in its purest form, transforming loyalty into stone. After the death of Selim I and the accession of Suleiman, her role did not diminish, it grew. During the first 6 years of the Magnificent's reign, Hafsa formally remained in Manisa, the old residence of the Shehzadeh, but from there she ruled an invisible empire. Her network of informants and spies covered the entire country. She learned of conspiracies in the provinces before the viziers in the divan. She controlled the harem in the old palace, the incubator of future rulers and a source of invaluable connections. She was the supreme arbiter in disputes among the concubines, the educator of her grandchildren, including the future Sultan Selim II, and a key personnel agent. Her move to Topkapi in 1526 was not a capitulation but a relocation of headquarters. Now she was at the epicenter, and herein lies the main paradox of her relationship with Hurrem. Myth portrays them as enemies, the old lioness, guardian of tradition, versus the young predator shattering conventions. The reality revealed by the archives is more complex and more interesting. If we believe the television dramatization, the Topkapi harem met Hurrem with icy silence, if not outright hatred. The mother, the sisters, the entire clan of Ottoman women saw her as an upstart who stole the Padishah's heart from the legitimate favorite Mahidevran. Beautiful? Undoubtedly. Plausible? Historical documents whispered to us a different, far more complex story. This story begins with a simple but key question. How did she even end up there?
Legend number 1. The awkward gift from the beloved vizier. The spiciest, most soap opera plot. Allegedly, Ibrahim Pasha, the closest friend and grand vizier, presented Suleiman with a young slave girl as a gift. The source is the Italian traveler Luigi Bassano de Zara, who recorded this gossip in 1545. The story took hold. Here is the price of friendship with the Sultan. Here is the shadow of Pargali's future fall. But here lies a fatal inconsistency. At the time of Hurrem's appearance in the harem, around 1520, Ibrahim was merely an Icholani, the Sultan's intimate companion, the chief falconer. Close? Yes, but the status allowing him to make personal gifts to a monarch of that level? No. As Leslie Pierce points out, such a privilege was the exclusive right of pashas of the highest rank. Ibrahim would receive that title later. So, the chronology shatters the beautiful legend. Bassano most likely recorded an already later palace tale, embellished by rumors of the vizier's power and envy towards the favorite. Legend number 2. The project of the Sultan's family. Here is a version that forces us to look at the situation differently. The Habsburg ambassador Hans Dernschwam reports in his dispatches a most curious detail. The wife of Sultan Suleiman is a Russian woman, and she was raised by his mother and elder sister. This version aligns with another semi-mythical plot, that Hurrem was originally in the harem of Sultan Suleiman's father, Sultan Selim I. Why? This would have been a classic dynastic move. Valide Hafsa and the princesses could have been overseeing a promising girl, teaching her languages, court etiquette, the subtleties of politics, creating an ideal instrument of influence for the future sultan. Like an expensive horse being trained for the crown prince. Ruthless pragmatism raised to the absolute.
And now a third witness steps onto the stage, whose word carries weight. Qut Abdin al-Mekki, the envoy of the Sharif of Mecca. He observes the harem not from the corridors of the seraglio, but through the lens of international diplomacy. And he records not enmity, but something quite the opposite. He writes of an extraordinary closeness between Valide Hafsa and the wife of the Sultan, known as Roxolana, of a relationship more akin to that of mother and daughter. And then he makes a crucial clarification. According to his information, the Valide personally raised this girl for her son and gifted her to him when he was still a Shahzadeh. Piece together this puzzle from these sources, and the picture of universal hatred falls apart. A different scenario comes into view. Hurrem might not have been a random trophy, but a strategic project, a project involving the most influential women of the empire. If so, her meteoric rise was not an audacious coup, but the successful implementation of a plan where Valide Hafsa was not an enemy, but rather a patron, a mentor, and perhaps the key beneficiary.
Now, let's shake up the familiar picture where the mother-in-law and daughter-in-law are eternal rivals fighting for a man's attention. Because the archives are silent, deafeningly so. In the reports of Venetian spies, in the memoirs of diplomats, in the records of court chroniclers, not a single line about Hafsa and Mahidevran being bosom allies against the cunning Slav. This dazzling version was born much later in the nuns of novelists. So what was really happening? A scandal, a full-blown palace one. That very episode in the series with the Russian slave girls is not fiction. It happened. But while in the series Valide hopefully slips the young beauties to her son, reality was far more cynical and ingenious. According to the same perceptive Venetian, Bragadin, this gift sent Hafsa Sultan into a rage, not just mild irritation, but the full-blown anger of a mistress whose domain had been invaded by uninvited guests without her consent. And she didn't just pout, she gave an order. Harsh and uncompromising, immediately expel the girls from Topkapi and marry them off to some provincial governors in the backwaters of the empire. And Suleiman, that same mighty ruler whose will was law for millions, agreed. Moreover, he publicly supported his mother's decision, stating that the presence of these women might sadden his beloved Hurrem. This is not merely a concession, it is a demonstrative gesture of loyalty, a signal to the entire court. The whim of one woman, Hurrem, is protected by the will of the two most powerful people in the empire. There was no war between them. Where myth sees trenches and intrigue, history finds rather a succession. There is a version that Hurrem, while educating the future Sultana Nurbanu for her son Selim, consciously copied Hafsa's model. She was preparing not just a concubine, but a strategic partner, a diplomat, and an administrator. The pupil was repeating the path of the teacher. And the final, damning argument against the theory of eternal enmity. Look at the inner circle. Suleiman's sisters, influential and proud descendants of the dynasty. If Hurrem had been a scandalous upstart who trampled on the memory of their mother, their rejection would have been deafening. But history has not preserved a single hint of their conflict. Silence. And in diplomatic and court chronicles, such silence is the loudest indicator. It means only one thing. There was no War of the Roses in the harem. There was a calculating, cool, and incredibly effective alliance. The wedding of Suleiman and Hurrem, this historical and televised happy ending, did not occur in a vacuum. Precise chronology is the key that turns the romantic fairy tale on its head. Suleiman officially married his concubine only in 1534. What happened that same year? Hafsa Sultan passed away. Not just a mother, an architect, a warden, the commander of all that happened behind the harem walls. Her death left behind not merely an emptiness, but a power vacuum, and the throne of the empire's leading woman, the Valide, was now vacant, but by law there was no one eligible to occupy it. And here begins not a love story, but a brilliant political move disguised as passion. Suleiman didn't just need a new favorite, he urgently needed a new manager, a trusted person who could take control of that most complex mechanism, the harem, which was simultaneously private quarters, the empire's personnel reserve, and a center of intrigue. Hurrem, with her sharp mind, unprecedented influence over him, and a lack of competitors, was the perfect candidate. Thus, the title of Hafsa Sultan was born. This was not simply beloved wife, it was a state position, a pass into the highest league of power. Her own treasury, staff of servants, the right to conduct diplomatic correspondence. He created for her the post of harem director, but only after he had lost its previous manager. And what about Suleiman's famous loyalty? Yes, he closed his harem on a personal level. He stopped visiting his other concubines. But this was a gesture of personal devotion, not the abolition of the institution. The harem as a system, a factory for heirs, a school for pashas, a tool of foreign policy through dynastic marriages, functioned like clockwork. It was simply removed from the sultan's personal control and handed over to a professional manager. That manager named Hurrem. Thus, the wedding and the title were not the finale of a love story, but its sober administrative continuation. Suleiman did not merely marry the woman he loved, he appointed her head of one of the key departments of his empire. As for the age-old feud between Hürrem Sultan and Hafsa Sultan, that is what happens when history collides with money. The real Hürrem and Hafsa, who lived in the 16th century, left behind not a script for a soap opera, but documents, hundreds of which have survived. Contemporaries described their alliance with respect bordering on admiration. The Ottoman historian Kemal Pashazadeh, their contemporary, called Hafsa the bulwark of the dynasty, and Hürrem the light of charity. No toxicity, just a business report. Two women who strengthened the power and influence of the dynasty through joint projects. Venetian ambassadors in their encrypted dispatches home recorded their coordinated diplomatic play. This was top-league politics, not kitchen drama. Historiography long maintained this line. 19th-century scholars analyzed their charitable waqifs as complex economic instruments, comparing their influence to modern foundations. The 20th-century Turkish giant of historical science, Halil İnalcık, digging deep into the Ottoman archives, found not traces of poison, but dry firmans, imperial decrees of Sultan Suleiman, confirming their joint initiatives. Modern researchers state plainly their alliance was a strategic move to strengthen Suleiman's position and neutralize the influence of other factions, such as the Mahidevran party. Reality was more boring, but smarter. It was a tandem, not a turf war. And then came television, and the great mythologization began. The series The Magnificent Century did to history what a blender does to vegetables. It turned complex texture into a bright, easily digestible mush. Hafsa became a conservative mother-in-law, clutching her heart in horror at the sight of her headstrong daughter-in-law. Hurrem, a true adventuress, ready to do anything, even poison, for power. Viewers, holding their breath, followed their confrontation. Ratings soared to the skies. The problem is, this had very little to do with reality. The audience's belief in the myth reached an anecdotal 70%, despite the small print of artistic fiction in the credits. Why did this lie prove so tenacious? The answer is simple. Drama sells. The mother-in-law versus daughter-in-law conflict is archetypal, understandable to every culture from Istanbul to California. The story of the strategic cooperation of two intelligent women who managed an empire through soft influence and economic levers requires explanation. The Internet, as an echo chamber, amplified this myth. YouTube channels with millions of subscribers repeatedly peddle fakes. How Hafsa cried to expel Hurrem from the harem. The archives remain silent in response. Not a single contemporary source, neither Ottoman nor Venetian nor Persian, records anything of the sort. On the contrary, Hafsa's death in 1534 coincided not with Hurrem's downfall, but with her absolute ascent. She not only survived, she flourished, becoming the Sultan's first official wife and continuing the projects of the Valide Sultan in her own name. Historical truth turns out to be no less cinematic. It simply belongs to a different genre. This is not a melodrama, but a political thriller.
Two women from different worlds, one likely the daughter of a Crimean bey steeped in the wisdom of the steppe, the other a kidnapped Slav who graduated from the school of survival, entered into a silent pact. They built mosques, bathhouses, and public kitchens together. Their wakifs, a complex network of charitable foundations, fed the poor, treated the sick, and built the infrastructure of an empire. Hafsa laid down the canon of the all-powerful Valide Sultan, and Hurrem developed it brilliantly. They did not divide power, they multiplied it. The irony is that their real legacy is tangible to this day. The Hafsa Sultan complex in Istanbul, built for Hurrem by the great Sinan, still functions. Her foundations, which fed people for centuries, are not a metaphor, but documents in the archives. Their story is not a lesson in enmity, but in the art of alliance under the most constrained circumstances. By rewriting it for the sake of ratings, popular culture does not merely distort the past, it steals from us a far more compelling plot, one about how intellect, not intrigue, changes the world.